Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Health Collective podcast, in which we're talking with Dr. Ola Abbas, a dual accredited consultant in critical care and acute medicine, who has recently walked away from her medical career to focus on travel. If you're interested in travel, in holidays, in learning more about how to make the most out of your travel career, and also if you just want to understand what the changing patterns of behavior are when it comes to travel and how to use that to your advantage, then this episode is for you. As always, if you need any help in your mental, physical, emotional, or body health, or you're just looking to get on top of those wretched hormones, give us a little message, or you can head to our website, www.thehealthandfitnesscoach.com. Check out the episode and enjoy. Welcome everyone to today's episode of the Health Collective podcast. And like I already said in the intro, we have Ola with us. Now, Ola, I would love you to give us a little bit of a background of what brought you to the place that you're in today, what brought you to the role, the career, and the choices. If you could just give us a little bit of a personal history of what sort of made you who you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for having me today on the show, Rita. So I feel like I have a little bit of an unconventional story because I get asked that question of what brought me to where I am today, but I just 15 years ago, if you had asked me, I wouldn't have known that I would end up where I am today. I was born, raised, grew up in Iraq. I qualified there, got my medical degree, and I always thought that that would be my life. You know, I lived the conventional, get married, have kids, have a clinic down the road from my house, and that would be my life as I would have imagined it. But the war made things take a bit of a twist and a turn, and I find myself having to leave my country, nothing in hand at all, just like a bag on my back, and I had to reinvent myself in a new country. Spent a few years in the Middle East, but then I had to pick up and leave and then come to the UK to carry on with my medical career. Did about 10 years of that. It's been about almost 10, 11 years I've been in the UK, and I've finished my medical qualifications, became a consultant. But I just found myself having this calling to do more and to give more. And a long story short, I ended up having established a travel franchise that is active now in 3 different countries, and I help medics intensify their wealth and well-being through travel. So that's a very nutshell of my journey of where I've been and how I came to be where I am.
As you said, an unconventional story, and we love unconventional stories here. Before we sort of talk about some of the travel and the business aspects, from my standpoint as someone in the UK, I viewed the Iraq War from essentially what the media portrayed. I remember going on a march through London with millions of people. I remember a lot of turmoil in this country in terms of political views. It was a very divisive time. Could you give us a little bit of an insight into your own view of how it affected you and your family? But equally, there's probably a lot of people that resent the UK or the UK politicians who were involved in creating that war, but you chose to then end up here. So how did it affect you, and what led you to settling in England as your eventual base?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's always that divide that we have to remember between politics and people, because they're not necessarily representative of each other. And while politics have decided to launch a war for whatever reasons that they had justified or not justified, the people would be different and they have a different sentiment towards it. I always felt a close relationship to England, to the UK. When I was much younger, I think I must have been about like 3 or 4. My dad did his PhD in England, so we came over to Bradford. We lived here for a few years. Then we went back home, and again from years and years, and again it goes back probably to the 1920s, where Iraq was occupied by the United Kingdom, as other countries were. So we kind of like have this this long-standing, strong history. Our educational systems are following, so to speak, the UK tradition. So when I graduated from my medical school, it was established by the British University of Baghdad. So it's kind of like it's there, it's in the history, it's always in the backdrop. And having lived here as a child as well, that kind of like influenced things. And then when I came to the point of deciding like, right, okay, where do I want my medical career and how I'm gonna like have the next 5-10 years of my life kind of shape up, I needed to make a decision about it. And from the options that I had at that time, I didn't want to go too far away to Canada and America. I didn't want to learn a new language like Germany, France, and others. My family still lived in Dubai, so coming back to the UK just seemed like the most likely option for me to take. And that's kind of like how I ended up through that route. Didn't really think about like war, politics, history, all of that kind of like, so to speak, the negative charge. I just kind of like had an open mind and being open and receptive of what possibilities and opportunities are out there.
Amazing. I love being open to all sorts of opportunities, regardless of maybe the external factors that are going on. And do you feel that those geographical transitions that you had sort of growing up through adulthood, and it sounds like with family in Dubai, you've got quite a lot of a geographical sort of disparate array of people in various different continents. Do you feel that that had any impact on your choice to go into a travel sort of industry or a travel business at this stage?
Yeah, I believe there's strong correlations, so to speak. So my family now, I do still have family members back in Iraq. I have some family in Turkey who had left and went to Turkey. I have some, my parents and brothers are living in Dubai. I'm in the UK. My husband, which we recently got married, he's in Holland. So we are geographically quite well spread. Oh, and also have family in America now. So I've always been traveling, and traveling has always kind of like been an integral part of my life since I had left my country, since I've left Iraq back in 2007. There's always been traveling, moving, going to another country, whether that is for a short term or a long term. And travel has kind of like opened up my eyes to so much more possibilities, opened up my mindset, learning from other people and seeing other people's challenges. Kind of like when you come back home, it makes you think about what you're going through in a different way. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like there's a whole nother story in the whole, your husband's in Holland and you're here. I mean, if you can make that work, then that's, kudos to you for the long distance relationship. So with travel, I hear a lot of women, especially sort of they hit 40, 45, kids are either grown up fully or they're in that sort of teenage stage where they can appreciate travel in a different way. I hear a lot of women saying that travel is a top value in their life. Just in the same way that they tell me that health is a top value in their life. However, at the same time, they sit on the sofa eating chips or dipping bread in anything runnier than bread and, saying, well, health is a top value. And a lot of women, although they want to travel and feel that it should be a value of theirs, aren't actually taking the action towards it. They're not taking holidays. They're not going past the usual sort of TUI hotels in Spain. That seems to be as far as we all get from the UK. So what do you feel is the key reasons that maybe holds people back from traveling and exploring different cultures more regularly?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great question. I remember when it was about 4 years ago now, just before the pandemic, 2019, I came up to a kind of like a natural break in my career where I finished training and I was about to take a consultant grade job. And in that time, I decided to go traveling. I was like, I've got this time, I've got some savings, all of that kind of thing. And I had this calling for travel. And I went away solo traveling for 5 months. And I went to so many different countries and continents. And I still remember very vividly one of my female colleagues that when I told her I was going to go traveling, she was like, oh my God, you must be so brave. And I was okay, you know. But then I just thought into my head, like, if I was a man, would you have made that remark, you know? And I think a lot of us as women, we get put down by societal expectations, number one, by the nature of our roles, that we are the caregivers, we look after the family, we have to be there as the anchor. And we often neglect to look after ourselves and what is our values and what we want to achieve and what's meaningful in our lives. So I think that's one of the things that hold women back. And it's that societal and cultural, so to speak, expectation, and that what we put on ourselves as a responsibility. But also, I find there's like this fear of the unknown. Like, a lot of women ask me and they go like, oh, is it safe to go to, like, I don't know, Japan, or is it safe to go to, like, somewhere in Europe, wherever it might be? And I'm like, yeah, there are people living in that country, you know, like, it is safe. Obviously, do the obvious, avoid dark alleys, don't go out late at night, don't, you know, there is those common things that you'd need to avoid. But again, I find fear is one of the things that hold women back. And there are a lot of things that you can do to overcome that fear, so to speak. I find, for example, networking, being part of travel communities, going on group trips, it can bring you out of that zone of yours. So those are the things that I mainly find, cultural expectations and fear, that hold women back. And possibly also not knowing what to do with their time. Not a lot of us are accustomed on being, like, if you travel on your own or if you go and travel with a group, not a lot of us are accustomed with doing that. And then it's like, ooh, if I'm on my own, I'm going to be lonely, or if I'm with a group, oh, this is going to be awkward. That's potentially another thing.
One of the biggest fears that I see in a lot of women, and maybe you experience the same, is a fear of wasting time, a fear of dropping the ball, you know, feeling now that we have so many different roles and arenas that our energy is pulled towards. There's this sort of conscious belief system that says you must just keep going, do. There's no such thing as being anymore. And I think holidays are that idea of just being. And sometimes, and I've seen it in myself in the past as well, I've gone on holiday and said I can't wait to relax, and then I've done everything in my power to fill my time and just doing, and then I get home and think I need a holiday to recover from that. So do you feel that women, or just as a culture, we've lost the ability to just explore and be in the moment? Do you feel that that is an art form that's actually starting to disappear?
Because we've lived for so long with this hustle grind culture of, like, every waking hour must be a productive hour, but our definition of productive gets skewed so much over time, and we forget that rest is productive in itself, that disconnecting is productive in itself. And I think this impacts women far more than it does for men, because this culture of corporate, I think it's born out of corporate life, of, like, you know, climbing up the corporate ladder, this competition, this achievement being celebrated. I think this all comes from a man energy, and women walked into the workplace not knowing what this equality is going to be like. And as a woman, our physiology and energy is completely different to what a man's cycle of energy and what their physiology is like. And so we're finding ourselves in this cycle of hustle and grind that goes completely against what our natural cycle is. And then we just kind of, like, hit that stress and that burnout and that depletion. But also we have that extreme guilt and feeling ashamed that we're not doing, you know, we're not creating and we're not being. And that also kind of, like, factors in as, like, when you take a holiday, you can't actually be taking a holiday because you've still got, like, a to-do list to go through. Yeah.
Absolutely. In terms of travel then, what do you see as, and I'm sure you could go on for hours with this question, but try and keep it to sort of a couple of minutes. What do you see as the benefits? So if we actually look at the physical and the emotional self, rather than, you know, if we could probably go into business benefits and networking and all sorts, but from a physical and emotional well-being sense, what do you see are the benefits of travel specifically for women?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's that physical getting moving your
Mm.
body, as opposed to just sitting every evening on the sofa and watching TV or whatever it might be. So that's that physical activity, and especially if you incorporate experiences within your travel, because like you said, there is that holiday type of travel where you go for an all-inclusive and you don't like adventure outside of the hotel. But then there's also that kind of travel where you're going out and you're experiencing and you're going adventure, etc., kind of like activities doing it. So that's that physical element is there. But also in terms of changing the weather, changing your atmosphere, having that reset as well, with the type of food that you're eating. um, Exposure to sun, especially with the ones that are less fortunate, like us living in the UK, we don't get much sunshine.
Yeah.
That's got a huge like health benefit from a psychological perspective, and also from a physical perspective, like, you know, with your vitamin D and all of that, and your bone health. And also decision making, being more independent, being able to kind of like have that logistic, you working your brain, you think you're thinking, your decision making capacity, and that also helps with, brain is a muscle at the end of the day, and if you don't use it, you lose it. And having that feeling of independence, and that you can look after yourself rather than having
Mm.
to depend on someone else, that has again lots of psychological, emotional benefits.
So, with all of those benefits, and as you said, there's a lot of fear around travel as well that's maybe preventing people from reaping the rewards that you've just beautifully articulated for us. Do you feel, and you know, this is something that, especially in the UK, we're seeing become more and more prevalent, but probably across the globe in certain Western societies, especially the States as well, this idea of them and us. And you know, we can be honest on shows like this and say that the UK is becoming, I would say, more divided in the sense of, you know, keep people out, look after us. And this is always what happens when survival mechanism kicks in, because everyone's struggling, you know, whether it's with finances or time or job. And a lot of these places that you describe, some of my favorite travel experiences have been across Asia, across the Caribbean, you know, to places where I was very much as a sort of white Western woman, a minority. And I love that. But there's also this kind of, they don't look like us, therefore that scares me. And I'm seeing from just conversations that I overhear this kind of divide in the UK now actually infiltrating people's opinions of where to go travel. So it's right, well, let's stay in Europe because everyone looks like us, so I trust them more. Have you seen any of the sad divisions that are happening in this country have an impact on people's choices as to where they then go and travel?
Mm. And that's kind of like getting into the behavioral science of people's
Mm,
choices and things like that, because it's like influenced by media, influenced by politics, and
mm,
then your definitions of what is safe, what is good, what is bad get influenced remarkable in a very remarkable way. So I'm very different. People on the podcast won't be able to see me. So I'm ethnic, I'm Arab, I'm from the Middle East. I'm like, you know, I'd like to say I'm olive sun-kissed kind of like skin.
I love that. Absolutely.
so, so for me, it's been kind of like a different experience. Is that like when I go away and traveling, I'm looked as like although I've been lived in the UK for like 10 years, and like going to Europe for me is like an extension, so to speak, of the UK, although now it's Brexit. But I get looked at as like I'm different, and I'm someone who's come from another side of the world. And then when I start speaking English, they go like, oh, you speak English very well. I'm like, yeah, you know, I live in the UK, you know, kind of like, and this has been my life for a little over a decade. So there is that. I kind of like catch on to that. And for some reason, if I actually travel to areas where I blend in,
Mm,
from a looks perspective, people kind of like feel that I'm more native and kind of like relate to me more and then when I start talking, oh, like you're English. And then it's just like this whole thing of like, well, I'm originally Arab, but I live in England and this kind of thing. This is where I'm at. And so, yeah, I have noticed this over time of like where people are feeling like, you look like this, so you belong to this, and then this is what I would expect. And I very much against it because, like I said, people and politicians are different, but then again, people are different to what that country might be. It's not just a one size fits all. It's not because you look a certain way, then you have certain beliefs and certain practices and certain thoughts, and then it means that I can't connect with you. And I think it's, the more you the less you travel, the less you would be able to connect with people who look different to you, and the more you shrink into that kind of like, so to speak, cocoon, and the more you get isolated, and the more kind of then the negative consequences of that on your own health and well-being.
Absolutely.
Don't know if
Sorry.
that helps. No, I
No,
was
no,
like, I don't. Yeah.
No, it does. And you mentioned the B word, Brexit. Have you seen in your industry a change in travel habits since both the coincidence of Brexit and COVID and the pandemic? Have you seen people's travel behaviors and patterns change over the last few years?
So after COVID, we have noticed a big surge of people wanting to travel more abroad. Actually, and having bigger budgets for their travel. A lot of it comes from the sense of like, COVID has happened, you know, this is a massive wake-up call. It's a little bit of that whole YOLO attitude, you know, and so we've been seeing a lot in travel with regards to traveling to kind of like destination, a bit more exotic, a bit more bucket list kind of travel. However, it is more on the side of the all-inclusive, on the side of like all packaged, all kind of like in like the really well-known places that, for example, the British people would be comfortable because they know that brand name. You know what I mean? Rather than the type of travel where it is like, I'm just going to go and explore, and I'm going to go to the like where the locals like to see and like to go and eat and, you know, have that experience of that country. So yeah, that's something that I've definitely noticed more. Some of it is disguised under the, oh, I just want to kind of like kick back and relax. But I feel there is more to it, and especially kind of like, you know, when it's a bit, it feels like it's a bit disguised under that whole like, I want to kick back and relax, so I'm going to this comfort zone or this cocoon within this exotic place.
This sort of using that as a mask to actually hide some fears or insecurities, or just a desire to not want to actually experience the truth of the other country. I want to basically have sunshine and I want to feel like I'm having a holiday, but I don't want to experience the culture as it is.
Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of your business, could you give us a little bit of an idea of what you do in the travel sector, how you actually help people experience that travel life?
Yeah, absolutely. So my main focus in the business is to help medics set up and scale an online travel business, so that then they can go on and sell travel, whether that is packages or individual experiences, etc., wherever it might be in terms of travel products, or they might be able to coach and mentor someone else on to set up and start a business. So I think of myself more of, or I define myself more as a travel business coach rather than a travel advisor or consultant, although that is still something within my capacity. So the focus of like the travel that I would niche into, that I do actually specialize in booking, is focused more on like experiential travel, well-being travel, things along the lines of, people might recognize them in like in terms of retreats, or experiential travel, like, you know, cooking, language holidays, these kind of things where you actually go and connect with a local host and be able to experience that culture.
Fabulous. That they're the kind of, travel holidays that I absolutely love. We run our retreat every year. Next year we're going to Bali.
Ooh.
I know I can't. I mean, I must say some of it was from a selfish perspective. I just said, well, I've always wanted to go to Bali, so I'm going to take you. But
Brilliant.
absolutely, those sort of going to Brazil. I remember doing a salsa holiday because I love salsa dancing to
Mm,
Brazil and just experiencing the sort of the local raw authentic culture that
yeah.
they had rather than the sort of the brand name hotels.
Mm.
So for yourself, if I were to say, what does travel mean to you? What are some of your favorite places to visit? How do you like to experience on a personal level travel? What would be your own personal views?
For me, and it might sound like a bit of an extreme to others, but for me, to travel is to live. I can't be without it. And now I've gotten into a habit of traveling every 4 to 6 weeks. Like you said, I mean, like I do have an international family, so that gives me a good excuse, but also I'm very mindful of like not falling in that habit of just going to visit them. I need to go out and see new places. For me, travel is all about getting to know the culture, going into like the towns, walking around rather than just being chauffeured in a taxi. It's about eating, that there you get a lot of people's culture from sharing a dish with them. Trying to learn as much as possible of like what are the customs, what are the habits. That to me is the most important things about travel, and it's what really makes me feel alive. Yeah.
Amazing. Travel is living. To be honest, I pretty much agree with you. I travel to probably 6, 7 different countries a year. It would be more if I didn't have 3 very small children, but they suddenly holidays when you have 5 of you become highly expensive. And
Mm,
that's probably where my last question would be is that for some people, travel has become restrictive. And we've seen
mm,
it in this country that there is becoming more of a divide between those that can and those that can't. And I am a big believer that you do make your life. If you are unhappy with a situation, whether it's your body, your health, your relationship, your finances, you can change it. But equally, I say that from a very privileged position. I am able to. And sometimes, we can forget what it's like to, I remember living in London the first time I ever moved there and having to choose between buying bread or buying a tube ticket. That was the financial
mm,
situation I found myself in. And for people like that, listening to us talking, this is beyond their wildest dreams, going to Skegness is, their
mm.
idea of a paradise holiday. So what are some tips or ideas or guidance that you could give people who maybe are on a bit of a tighter budget, but still want to explore and experience and understand the world and the culture and grow as individuals? How
Mm.
would you advise them to maybe look at their travel ideas?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of experiences that are on their, on their doorstep. You don't have to travel to wide and far exotic places if you can't from a budget perspective. You can save on that flight, for example, and choose to drive to maybe a local area. I mean, like the UK itself is a hub of tourism that a lot of people from abroad come to be able to
Mm.
see, whether it's the nature outdoors, whether even it's the cities themselves. There's like a lot of kind of like experience pockets that people can explore very much locally within the UK. The other tips that I would say is plan ahead of time. Flights get released like 11 months before the travel date. So that gives you a big gap of time to be able to kind of like plan. So if you want to go away, if Christmas is your only time off, don't start looking at flights a month or two before. You need to be looking way ahead of time in order to sort that. There's kind of like lots of tips and tricks around you can look up literally on the internet tips and tricks on how to kind of like bag yourselves like the best flights, but always speak to a travel advisor because they know the industry from the inside and they can advise you on that. But also thinking about countries where the pound can stretch a bit more. So, instead of going to countries where the pound would be like the same buying power, so to speak, in a lot of European countries, maybe, or America, start thinking about other countries that are a little bit further afield, Southeast Asia, for example, or even North Africa, where your pound has more buying power. And that way you can start to enjoy more on what would be a smaller budget, or a longer holiday and what would be like a, so to speak, a small budget. So these are just kind of like some tips and ideas of how you can do that. Another very tip, is a bit of a shameless plug of me, is to be in travel, have your own travel business, and then you can earn from what you do.
It's all right. We love a good plug on this show. It's all good.
Yeah, but I mean, like there are these kind of like tips, and it's like when people think of travel again, and I think that's a bit of a, maybe a media or what's advertised heavily, is that they think of like a holiday is that, like, you know, the expensive flight, the 5-star budget, the whole kind of like package thing, and it doesn't need to be like that. You can have you can make a slight compromise, for example, on your hotel booking to be able to have more experiences. Or maybe you choose the flight times that are slightly, maybe fly out a bit early, fly out a bit late, don't fly out on weekends. Tuesday and Wednesday tend to be the best flying days.
Okay.
Midweek, Tuesdays and Wednesdays, always tend to be the best flying prices. When you search for flights, if you're not restricted by your dates, then again, have a look at the whole month instead of looking at a certain date. And most of the search engines will allow you to do that. And it will show you the, like, how much would it be if you go out on this day versus this day versus this day versus this day, you know? So there are kind of like some ways that you can do, just kind of like step back and think about it differently on how you're looking for your holiday.
Amazing. I love that. I love a good travel tip. I always think that you can't go amiss. And no, there's some really, really useful stuff there that we can take away. And also, it's just been really fascinating talking to you about your own experiences of travel and what travel really means to you, because I think, especially in the UK, you know, those listening in America and Canada who have much larger plots of land, over here we have boxes. Most people spend their life in a box. They then get in a box on wheels to drive to another box. They then stare at a box every single day. They then come home, and to relax, they sit on the couch and stare at a box. And actually, travel is about getting out of the box, about breaking free, about experiencing what the unknown, unparalleled beauties of the world have to offer. And I think if you can, you know, save a bit on your Netflix subscription and travel somewhere, that's always what I would say.
100%. So many people pay for so many things that actually is not contributing to what they want, what their goals are. And I think going back, and if travel is a value, if someone is listening to us and travel is a value that you hold highly, or is a desire and a dream that you want to achieve, then go back into what you are already doing, what you're spending money, time, and energy on, and see how you can redirect it away from the things that are not serving you into the thing that serves your values.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. And if anyone wants some more information about travel business, about countries, or they just want to have a chat, because we always like a bit of a coffee and a chat, how is the best way for people to get in contact with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best way is through my website, Elevate with Ola, and through that you can ping me an email on info@elevatewithola.com.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much, Ola, for joining us today. And thank you to everybody for listening to today's episode. And I look forward to seeing you all on the next one. In the meantime, have a fabulous day.